Good day, everyone. We will be discussing the first chapter of Justin Harmon's The Normative Architecture of Reality Towards an Object-Oriented Ethics. Here's a short background of the author, Justin L. Harmon. He wrote the text that we will be discussing today as a dissertation for a doctorate in philosophy degree in the College of Arts and Sciences and University of Kentucky. He currently works as a faculty member in Southern Oregon University, Humanities and Culture. His areas of interests include aesthetics, continental philosophy, object-oriented ontology, and speculative materialism, with his specializations being aesthetics and continental philosophy. Let us start off by defining the main and recurring terms for this chapter. The first one is speculative realism. So this pertains to a contemporary philosophical movement that challenges the dominant role of human perception and thought in philosophy. It's all about looking at the world beyond our human perspective and understanding that there is more to reality than what we can see or think. Next is correlationism. This refers to the idea that philosophy is inherently concerned with the correlation between thinking subjects, for example, humans, and the objects of their thought. In other words, it suggests that we can only understand or access reality through the lens of human perception, language, or consciousness. Post-humanist protoethics refers to a field of thought that explores ethical considerations in the context of emerging post-human technologies and the blurring boundaries between humans and technology. It emphasizes the need for new ethical frameworks that go beyond traditional human-centric views, taking into account the ethical implications of advanced technologies like AI, biotechnology, and transhumanism. Now, let us define object-oriented ethics by comparison. Object-oriented ethics is a branch of metaphysical philosophy that extends philosophical ideas into the realm of ethics, emphasizing the ethical agency and interconnectedness of all objects, whether human or non-human. So this is not to be confused with a similar branch called object-oriented ontology, which primarily deals with metaphysical questions regarding the existence and significance of all entities. So, object-oriented ethics can be seen as an application of the ontological principles of OOO or object-oriented ontology to ethical questions and concerns. Therefore, object-oriented ethics is a moral philosophy that emphasizes the objective reality of ethical principles. Objectivism holds that there are objective moral truths that exist independently of human beliefs and opinions. Another perspective on object-oriented ethics is by American philosopher Graham Harman. Harman's object-oriented ethics suggests that we should consider the ethical implications of how objects interact with one another, recognizing their autonomy and integrity. It is a departure from traditional ethical theories that primarily focus on human-centric moral frameworks. Now, before delving into the first chapter, let us take a look at all the other chapters for this reading. So the first chapter is entitled What is Living and What is Dead in Speculative Realism. Chapter 2, Being History of an Error. Chapter 3, Being Objects and Being. And the last chapter, bearing the title Objects and Interpretation. Chapter 1, What is Living and What is Dead in Speculative Realism. So the chapter starts off with a statement, this dissertation is a work in post-humanist proto-ethics. Normative ethics is concerned with a study of what is morally right and wrong, aiming to provide a rational and systematic framework for ethical decision-making. It offers a range of moral theories and principles, each with its own approach to addressing ethical questions and dilemmas. Normative ethics plays a crucial role in guiding individuals, organizations, and societies in their moral reasoning and actions. So one example of a situation is asking why is it wrong to swindle Mrs. Swanson out of her social security check? Because she is the sort of being that demands not to be swindled. Why is it wrong to effectively poison a community's water supply in order to save roughly $100 a year? Because a human community is the sort of being that demands not to be poisoned. Hence, even in the absence of some distinct theologically prioritized being, for example, God, the transcendental subject, that grounds the ethical relation in a justificatory metaphysics of morals, the normative still exercises itself. So one example of a situation is asking why is it wrong to swindle Mrs. Swanson out of her social security check? Because she is the sort of being that demands not to be swindled. Why is it wrong to effectively poison a community's water supply in order to save roughly $100 a year? Because a human community is the sort of being that demands not to be poisoned. Hence, even in the absence of some distinct theologically prioritized being, for example, God, the transcendental subject, that grounds the ethical relation in a justificatory metaphysics of morals, the normative still exercises itself. Ethical systems serve as the frameworks or approaches that guide our understanding and practice of ethics. These systems are described as technologies that simplify the task of perceiving and responding to the demands of objects. So the author, Justin Harmon, suggests that these ethical systems operate in a manner that artificially simplify the ethical domain for privileged groups of human subjects.
So now, in April 2007, Quentin Melasou, Graham Harman, Ray Basir, and Ian Hamilton Grant spoke at Goldsmith College in London at what would later be dubbed the first speculative realism event. Basier organized the meeting and purposely coined the term speculative realism in the wake of the 2000 publication of Melasou's After Finitude. The concept of correlationism has been defined by the philosophers Melasou and Harman. Particularly, Melasou defines it as the idea according to which we only ever have access to the correlation between thinking and being, and never either term considered apart from other. On the other hand, Harman defines this as the philosophy of access, which assumes that the human world gap is the privileged site of all rigorous philosophy. The phrase post-Kantian philosophy as a transparent cage refers to the idea that the philosophical developments that occurred after Immanuel Kant's work, particularly in the realm of metaphysics, were constrained by the frameworks and limitations set by Kant himself. This phrase suggests that despite the attempts to move beyond Kant's philosophy, subsequent thinkers were still confined within the boundaries and assumptions established by Kantian philosophy. Harman articulates two broad paths by which post-Kantian philosophy has tended to reduce objects. One is undermining, and the other is overmining. So let's go over these two terms. One undermines objects when one claims that objects are unreal because they are derivable of something deeper. Objects are too superficial to be the truth. Efforts to reduce objects to some deeper, more essential building blocks, such as atoms, quarks, monads, animal spirits, etc., are examples of undermining. On the other hand, a Harman coinage, overmining, occurs when one claims objects are unreal because they are useless fictions compared with what is truly evident in them, whether this be qualities, events, actions, effects, or givenness to human access. Harman wants to think of entities in general as objects because he believes that objects have a fundamental ontological status and that they exist independently of our perception of them. He argues that objects are not reducible to their properties or their relation with other objects, but rather they have a withdrawn essence that is inaccessible to direct experience. By thinking of entities as objects, Harman aims to shift our understanding of reality and challenge the anthropocentric perspective that privileges human subjects. He argues for a more egalitarian ontology, in which every object, whether human or non-human, is seen as a source of normative directives. As you may now have learned, there have been multiple influences who have shaped Harman's position on objects. First is Heidegger. Heidegger's views on objects challenge traditional philosophical perspectives that treat objects as passive, separate entities. He emphasizes the practical, contextual, and lived experience of objects, grounding his philosophy in the idea that we are always embedded in a world where our existence is intimately tied to the objects we encounter and use in our daily lives. Milasu challenges the notion that our access to objects is limited to their correlation with human consciousness. He proposes a speculative and realist perspective in which objects, their properties, and their relationships are considered to have an existence and contingency independent of human subjectivity. The third influence is Descartes. He introduced the concept of objective reality to distinguish between the formal reality of ideas, or what we think, and the objective reality of things in the world, or what exists independently of our thoughts. And lastly, Harman. Harman's philosophy aligns with the broader speculative realism movement, which seeks to move beyond the limitation of anthropocentrism and human-centered views of reality. Harman also claims that major ethical frameworks function as technology that simplify the process of perceiving and responding to the demands of objects. However, these frameworks often prioritize privileged groups of human subjects and exclude certain entities from ethical consideration. This includes non-human objects like animals and natural ecosystems, as well as certain human groups such as women and non-whites. The author suggests that these exclusions are a result of the artificial simplification imposed by ethical frameworks. In conclusion, Harman presents his own perspective on objects and reality, advocating for a flat or egalitarian ontology, in which every object is seen as a source of normative directives. They criticize ethical frameworks for excluding certain objects from consideration, and propose an ontologization of the ethical that includes all objects. So, in summary of the whole chapter 1, this chapter explores the concept of speculative realism and its relationship to post-humanism. It argues that the post-human condition requires us to question the metaphysical and cultural assumptions that shape our identities as modern humans. To be a subject is to be susceptible or exposed to the demands of the object, but not to the point of being determined or defined by such demands. This chapter also examines the idea of Milisu and Harman, two speculative realists who argue for the existence of an absolute truth or reality. It also discusses Heidegger's concept of readiness to hand and Harman's interpretation of it, critiquing Harman's nominalist conclusion and the theory of vicarious causation. Harman ultimately advocates for an equal ontology in which every object is seen as a source of normative directives. Harman also criticizes ethical frameworks for excluding certain objects from consideration and proposes an ontologization of the ethical that includes all objects, elevating the dignity and considerability of all entities in the world. Now, this has been The Normative Architecture of Reality by Justin L. Harman, as reported by Barol and Diva. Thank you.